A billionaire CEO stumbles upon his late wife's hidden letter, and its shocking revelations flip his entire world upside down. What secrets did she leave behind? Let's uncover the truth. But before we begin, we kindly request you to hit the subscribe and like button. It really helps us bring you these beautiful daily stories. The world outside seemed as cold and unyielding as the empty mansion Charles Prescott called home. His sprawling estate, with its marble floors and vaulted ceilings, echoed with a silence that felt heavier than ever. It had been a year since his wife Eleanor passed away, and though the world saw him as a powerful billionaire CEO, inside, he was a man drowning in grief and guilt. Eleanor had been the light of his life, a woman whose warmth and kindness had stood in stark contrast to his calculated, business-oriented nature. She had been his balance, his reminder that there was more to life than profits and power. But Charles hadn't always shown her the appreciation she deserved. His work had consumed him, leaving little time for the woman who had once been his entire world. That afternoon, as the anniversary of her death loomed over him, Charles found himself in the attic, a place he had avoided for months. The attic was Eleanor's sanctuary, a space where she stored her memories, old photographs, journals, and keepsakes from their travels. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through the small window. As Charles hesitated at the doorway, his chest tight with emotion, he stepped inside, his footsteps creaking against the wooden floor. The familiar scent of lavender, Eleanor's favorite, lingered faintly in the air, tugging at his heartstrings. Boxes labeled with her neat handwriting lined the walls, each one holding pieces of a life they had built together. As he opened one marked Memories, he found photographs of them smiling, carefree, from a time when their love had felt invincible. A wave of emotion crashed over him. How had they let those moments slip away? Why hadn't he prioritized her when she was still here? His hands trembled as he sifted through the contents of the box, finding letters, postcards, and small trinkets. It was then that he noticed a delicate envelope tucked beneath a stack of photographs. His name, Charles, was written on it in Eleanor's familiar script. His breath caught. The envelope was sealed, and the paper bore the faint scent of her favorite perfume. With a shaking hand, he opened it, revealing a handwritten letter. The sight of her graceful handwriting brought tears to his eyes, but he forced himself to focus on the words. "Dearest Charles," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. Please don't be angry with yourself for not finding this sooner. I wanted you to discover it when the time was right." Charles swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt as though she were speaking directly to him, her voice echoing in his mind as he read on. "I know our time together wasn't always perfect," the letter continued. "There were moments when I wished you could see the world the way I did. Moments when I wished you'd put down your phone, close your laptop, and just be present with me. But despite everything, Charles, I loved you with every fiber of my being, and I still do." Tears blurred his vision as he clutched the letter, the weight of her words pressing down on him. She had loved him, even in his flaws, even when he had been too consumed by his work to see her standing right in front of him. The letter went on to reveal something that took Charles by surprise. Eleanor had been working on a charity project in secret, a sanctuary for orphaned children. She had called it Haven's Light, a place where children without families could find love, safety, and opportunities to thrive. It was her dream, one she had never shared with him because she feared he wouldn't understand. "But I believe in you, Charles," the letter read. "I believe that you can make Haven's Light a reality, not for me, but for those children who need it most. It's my final wish, and I hope you can find it in your heart to honor it." Charles's hands shook as he reached the letter's closing lines. "This isn't goodbye, my love. I'll always be with you, in every sunrise and every whispered breeze. But now it's your turn to find the joy and purpose you've been missing. Live fully, Charles, love deeply, and remember, it's never too late to change." The letter ended with her signature, a flourish that seemed to carry her essence. Charles sat in stunned silence, the weight of her final wish settling on his shoulders. The emotions he had buried for so long surged to the surface: grief, guilt, and a deep longing to make things right. For the first time in over a year, Charles felt a spark of purpose reignite within him. Eleanor had left him a mission, a chance to honor her memory and make amends for the time they had lost. But it wouldn't be easy. The man he had been, the one consumed by ambition and blinded by work, would need to change if he was to fulfill her dream. Clutching the letter to his chest, Charles made a silent vow. He would bring Haven's light to life, not just for Eleanor, but for himself, and for the love that still lingered in the corners of his heart. This was his chance at redemption, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Charles Prescott had always been a man of ambition. Born into a modest family, he had clawed his way to the top through sheer determination and an unrelenting work ethic. By the time he reached his late 30s, he was a self-made billionaire, the CEO of one of the world's leading tech companies. His name was synonymous with innovation and success, and his empire spanned continents. Yet, despite his accomplishments, Charles had always been haunted by the feeling that something was missing. Eleanor had entered his life like a breath of fresh air, disrupting the carefully curated monotony of his existence. He had met her at a gallery event, where she was showcasing her artwork, vivid, emotive pieces that seemed to tell stories of hope and resilience. Unlike the people who usually surrounded Charles, Eleanor hadn't been impressed by his wealth or status. She had spoken to him with a disarming honesty, challenging his perspectives and drawing him out of his corporate shell. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Charles, who had always been reserved and guarded, found himself captivated by Eleanor's warmth and passion. She had a way of making him see the beauty in the ordinary, a sunset, a street musician, or a quiet moment shared over coffee. For the first time, he felt like he was truly living. Their wedding had been an intimate affair, much to the surprise of Charles's business associates. Eleanor had insisted on keeping it small and meaningful, and Charles had obliged, indulging her wishes even though it was far from the grand spectacle his world expected. In her presence, he had learned to let go, to laugh more, and to embrace the unpredictability of life. But as the months turned into years, the demands of his empire began to encroach on their happiness. Late nights at the office became the norm, and missed dinners and canceled plans became all too frequent. Eleanor, ever patient, tried to reach him, but her gentle reminders often went unnoticed amid the constant barrage of emails, meetings, and deadlines. Charles hadn't intended to neglect her. He told himself that his work was for their future, that the hours he poured into his company would one day allow them to live a life of unparalleled comfort. But Eleanor had never cared about material wealth. What she had wanted was his time, his attention, and his presence, things he had unknowingly withheld. The cracks in their relationship deepened during Eleanor's illness. It had started as fatigue and mild discomfort, symptoms she had brushed off as stress. But when the diagnosis came, a rare, aggressive form of cancer, Charles had been blindsided. He threw himself into action, arranging for the best doctors, the latest treatments, and anything money could buy to save her. Yet, despite his efforts, the disease progressed rapidly. Eleanor faced her illness with grace and courage, her focus always on Charles. Even in her weakest moments, she had tried to reassure him, to make him see that life wasn't about the things he could control, but about the love and connections that sustained them. Charles, however, had struggled to cope. Watching the woman he loved fade away was a pain he couldn't quantify, and his helplessness manifested as anger, at the doctors, at the world, and most of all, at himself. He buried himself in work, using it as an escape from the harsh reality of her decline. Eleanor noticed, of course, but she never chastised him. Instead, she used her remaining energy to prepare for the inevitable, leaving behind small reminders of her love for him. When she passed, Charles's world shattered. The mansion felt hollow without her laughter, and the silence was deafening. He immersed himself in his work, hoping to drown out the grief, but no amount of success could fill the void Eleanor had left behind. He avoided the spaces she had loved, the garden, her art studio, and the attic, because they were too painful to face. In his mind, it was easier to compartmentalize, to keep moving forward without looking back. But now, with Eleanor's letter in his hands, everything he had avoided came rushing back. Her words forced him to confront the truth he had been running from. He had failed her in ways he could never undo. Yet, in her infinite kindness, she had given him a chance to redeem himself. She had left him a purpose, a way to honor her memory, and to find meaning in his own life. As Charles sat in the attic, the weight of her final wish pressing on him, he realized that his life before Eleanor's letter had been a lesson in misplaced priorities. His wealth and power had meant nothing without her by his side. The letter was a wake-up call, A reminder that it wasn't too late to change. For the first time in years, Charles allowed himself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of the profound realization that love, not ambition, was the true measure of a life well lived. And in that moment, he made a vow to become the man Eleanor had always believed he could be. Charles sat in the dimly lit attic, the air thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. The letter in his trembling hands felt heavier than anything he had ever carried, heavier than the weight of his corporate empire, or the burden of his grief. It was as though Eleanor herself was speaking to him from beyond, her delicate handwriting a bridge between the life they had shared and the life she wanted him to embrace. He unfolded the parchment carefully, his heart pounding as he began to read. My dearest Charles, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to share your mornings or hold your hand during your restless nights. I'm so sorry for the pain you must be feeling, but I need you to know that you were, and always will be, the love of my life. Even in our hardest moments, I never doubted your heart, even when you doubted yourself. Charles's throat tightened and tears blurred his vision. Her words were a balm and a wound, soothing his aching soul while cutting through the armor of denial he had built around himself. He blinked rapidly, forcing himself to keep reading. There are so many things I wanted to tell you, but time wasn't kind to us. I knew you struggled to face my illness, and I never held that against you. I only wished you had let me in more. But that's not why I wrote this letter. I wrote it because I need you to do something for me, something that will require all the courage and love I know you have inside you. Charles paused, his breath catching. A request? What could she possibly ask of him now? His mind raced, but no amount of speculation could prepare him for what came next. Before I met you, Charles, my world was smaller, quieter. I didn't have the means or the connections you do, but I always dreamed of making a difference. There's a small community in Willow Creek where I grew up. It's a place filled with hard-working people who've struggled for generations, just like my family once did. Before I got sick, I wanted to help rebuild it, to create opportunities for the people who call it home, but I never had the chance. I'm asking you, my love, to make that dream a reality. Use the resources you've built to give them hope, to create something lasting in my memory. Start with the children. They're the future of Willow Creek, and they deserve a better start than I had. Charles's hands began to shake. He could almost hear Eleanor's voice, soft and steady, as though she were sitting beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. I know this might feel overwhelming, but you're capable of so much more than you realize. You have the power to change lives, Charles, not just through your wealth, but through your heart. You've always been stronger than you think, even when you don't believe it. One more thing, don't do this alone. Let others in, even when it feels impossible. Share your journey, your grief, your triumphs. Love doesn't disappear, Charles. It transforms, and it can still light your way if you let it. I'll always be with you. Every step you take, every decision you make, I'll be there, cheering you on, just as I always have. Forever yours, Eleanor. Charles sat back, the letter slipping from his fingers as he let the words sink in. He felt as though the air had been knocked out of him, as though the world had shifted on its axis. Eleanor's dream wasn't just a final request. It was a lifeline, a way for him to reconnect with the part of himself he had lost in his relentless pursuit of success. Her words unlocked a flood of memories. The stories she had told him about Willow Creek, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the children she had tutored during college, her hope for a world where no one had to struggle as her family had. At the time, he had listened with polite interest, but now, those memories carried new weight. He realized how much of Eleanor he had missed while he had been consumed by his work. And then there was her final plea. Don't do this alone. Charles' instinct had always been to rely on himself, to shoulder every burden without asking for help. It was a habit ingrained in him from childhood, one he had never questioned. But Eleanor was asking him to break that pattern, to open himself up to others in a way he never had before. The enormity of her request was both daunting and inspiring. How could he bring her dream to life? Where would he even begin? But as he sat there, surrounded by the echoes of their shared past, he felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Eleanor's letter wasn't just a message. It was a challenge, a call to action. She had believed in him, even when he hadn't believed in himself. And now, he had a choice to make. Continue living in the shadow of his grief, or honor her memory by embracing the purpose she had entrusted to him. Charles reached for the letter again, holding it tightly as though it were a lifeline. He read her words once more, this time aloud, letting them resonate in the stillness of the attic. "I won't let you down," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I promise, Eleanor, I'll make this right." As he stood, a sense of clarity washed over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew where to start. Eleanor had given him the roadmap. Now it was up to him to follow it. The drive to Willow Creek was both nostalgic and sobering. Charles hadn't visited the small town since the early days of his marriage to Eleanor. She had insisted on showing him where she had grown up, introducing him to the quaint streets and the people who had shaped her. At the time, he'd been too preoccupied with work to fully appreciate it. Now, as the countryside gave way to the humble charm of Willow Creek, he realized how much he had overlooked. The main street was a stark contrast to the bustling cityscapes Charles was accustomed to. Small businesses lined the road, many with faded signs and peeling paint. A few storefronts were boarded up, a testament to the town's economic struggles. Yet despite its hardships, there was a quiet resilience in Willow Creek. Children played on the sidewalks, and neighbors greeted each other warmly. It was the kind of close-knit community Eleanor had cherished, the kind she had dreamed of helping. Charles parked his sleek black car in front of a modest diner, its neon sign flickering faintly. The familiarity of the place hit him instantly. It was where Eleanor had brought him for lunch during their first visit. She had insisted they order her childhood favorite, the homemade apple pie. The memory brought a bittersweet smile to his face as he stepped inside. The diner was exactly as he remembered, down to the checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh coffee. A middle-aged waitress glanced up from behind the counter, her eyes widening in recognition. "Well, I'll be," she said, setting down her coffee pot. "If it isn't Charles Carter. You came back." Charles nodded, a mixture of gratitude and unease washing over him. "Hello, Martha. It's been a long time." "Too long," she replied, her tone warm but curious. "What brings you back to Willow Creek?" He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Eleanor," he said simply. "I'm here because of her." Martha's expression softened and she nodded knowingly. She was one of a kind, that girl, always talking about her big dreams for this little town. She gestured to a booth near the window. "Sit down. You look like you could use a good meal." Charles obliged, and before long a plate of eggs and toast was placed before him, along with a slice of apple pie. As he ate, he couldn't help but notice the chatter of the other patrons. Willow Creek was a small town, and news traveled fast. It wouldn't be long before everyone knew he was back. After finishing his meal, Charles paid his bill and asked Martha for advice. "I need to talk to someone who knows the town's needs, the schools, the families, someone who can help me make a difference." Martha thought for a moment before nodding. "You should speak to Pastor Reynolds. He runs the community center. If anyone knows what Willow Creek needs, it's him." Charles thanked her and left the diner, the weight of Eleanor's letter still heavy on his mind. The community center was a short drive away, a modest building with a small playground out front. Children's laughter echoed as they played on the swings and jungle gym, a reminder of the town's enduring spirit. Inside, the center bustled with activity. Volunteers organized supplies while parents filled out forms at a small reception desk. Charles approached a kind-looking man in his 60s, his gray hair neatly combed and his demeanor warm. "Pastor Reynolds?" Charles asked, extending his hand. The pastor shook it firmly. "That's me, and you are." "Charles Carter, I was Eleanor's husband." Recognition dawned in the pastor's eyes, followed by a glimmer of sadness. "Eleanor spoke highly of you," he said gently. "She had big dreams for this town. I take it you're here to carry them out?" Charles nodded. "I am. I've made mistakes, Pastor. I wasn't there for her when she needed me most, but I want to honor her memory by doing what she couldn't. I want to help." Pastor Reynolds studied him for a moment before smiling. "Well, Mr. Carter, you've come to the right place. We've been trying to get funding for the school's aftercare program and the food pantry, but resources are stretched thin. The people here are hard-working, but times are tough." Charles listened intently as the pastor outlined the town's most pressing needs. From educational resources to job training programs, it was clear that Willow Creek needed more than just financial support. It needed hope and opportunity. As the pastor spoke, Charles began to envision the possibilities: a state-of-the-art community center, scholarships for underprivileged students, and sustainable initiatives to support local businesses. "I want to fund all of it," Charles said. his voice firm with determination. "But I don't want this to be a handout. I want to create something lasting, something that empowers the people here to build better lives for themselves." Pastor Reynolds smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Eleanor would be proud. She always said you had a good heart, even if you didn't always show it." Charles felt a lump form in his throat but managed a small smile. "I owe her everything." The rest of the day was spent touring the town with the pastor, meeting locals and listening to their stories. There was Mrs. Jennings, a widowed teacher who spent her evenings tutoring struggling students. Ben, a single father working 3 jobs to support his children. And Maria, a teenager with dreams of becoming a doctor, but no means to pay for college. Each story tugged at Charles's heart, reinforcing the importance of Eleanor's dream. By the time he returned to his hotel that evening, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Charles whispered a silent promise to Eleanor. "I'll make this right. I'll honor you in the way you deserve." And with that, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Charles rose early, his mind racing with plans for the future. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of purpose, not tied to corporate deals or financial gains, but to something deeper and more meaningful. Eleanor's vision for Willow Creek had ignited something within him, and he was determined to see it through. Charles returned to the community center armed with a notebook filled with ideas he had jotted down the previous night. Pastor Reynolds greeted him with a warm smile, visibly pleased to see him back so soon. "Ready to get to work?" the pastor asked, clapping a hand on Charles's shoulder. "Absolutely," Charles replied, his tone resolute. "But I'll need your help. I want to make sure we do this right." The first order of business was a community meeting. Pastor Reynolds suggested gathering the townsfolk to discuss their needs and dreams for Willow Creek. It was a chance for Charles to listen, to understand the town's struggles and aspirations directly from the people who lived there. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday evening in the community center's modest auditorium. Flyers were distributed, and word spread quickly through the small town. By the time Friday arrived, the room was packed with residents of all ages. Charles stood at the front, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. He wasn't used to addressing such a personal crowd. His speeches were usually reserved for boardrooms and investors. "Thank you all for coming," Charles began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "My name is Charles Carter. Some of you may know me as Eleanor's husband. I'm here because she believed in this town, and I want to honor her memory by helping you build the future she dreamed of." The crowd murmured in approval, and Charles continued, "But I'm not here to impose my ideas. I want to hear from you about your challenges, your hopes, and what you think Willow Creek needs most." Hands shot up, and one by one the residents shared their stories. A young mother spoke about the lack of affordable childcare. An elderly man described the crumbling infrastructure of the town's only school. A local shop owner lamented the struggles of competing with big-box retailers. Each voice painted a picture of a town rich in community spirit but stretched to its limits. Charles took notes, listening intently to every word. The stories were raw and unfiltered, a stark contrast to the polished presentations he was accustomed to in his corporate life. By the end of the meeting, his notebook was filled with ideas and action points. As the crowd dispersed, several residents approached Charles to thank him for taking the time to listen. Their gratitude was humbling, a reminder of how much Eleanor's dream meant to the people of Willow Creek. The next step was turning those ideas into action. Charles met with Pastor Reynolds and a group of community leaders to outline a plan. They decided to focus on 3 key areas: education, local businesses, and community resources. But he didn't stop there. Charles arranged for after-school programs, including tutoring, art classes, and sports leagues. He knew these activities would not only enrich the students' lives, but also provide much-needed support for working parents. Charles recognized that revitalizing the town's economy was crucial. He partnered with local shop owners to develop strategies for growth, including marketing campaigns and online platforms to reach a wider audience. He also created a microloan program, offering low-interest loans to entrepreneurs looking to start or expand their businesses. To inspire confidence in the local economy, Charles personally invested in a new cafe and co-working space. The project created jobs and provided a space for residents to connect and collaborate. The community center became the heart of the revitalization efforts. Charles funded renovations, transforming it into a multi-purpose facility with a food pantry, job training programs, and a health clinic. He also established a fund to support families facing emergencies, ensuring that no one in Willow Creek would have to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. Of course, the transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some residents were skeptical of Charles's motives, viewing his efforts as a way to ease his guilt rather than genuine concern for the town. Others worried that his involvement might lead to unwanted changes or gentrification. Charles addressed these concerns head-on, holding regular town hall meetings to ensure transparency and involve the community in every decision. He also made a point of rolling up his sleeves and working alongside the residents, whether it was painting walls, planting trees, or unloading supplies. Slowly but surely, he earned their trust. One of the most poignant moments came when Charles visited the school with a group of volunteers to distribute new supplies. As he handed out backpacks filled with books and art materials, a young girl tugged on his sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said shyly. "My mom said you're like a superhero." Charles knelt down, smiling at her. "I'm no superhero," he replied gently. "I'm just trying to help." The girl beamed, her innocence and gratitude a reminder of why he was there. Through it all, Charles felt himself changing. The man who had once measured success in stock prices and quarterly reports now found fulfillment in small victories. The laughter of children on a new playground, the relief on a mother's face as she received a box of groceries, the pride of a shop owner whose business was thriving. But it wasn't just about the community. Charles was learning to forgive himself, to let go of the guilt that had consumed him since Eleanor's death. He realized that honoring her memory wasn't about atoning for the past. It was about building a future she would be proud of. As the weeks turned into months, Willow Creek began to transform. The school was bustling with activity, local businesses were thriving, and the community center was a beacon of hope. The changes weren't just physical, they were emotional. The people of Willow Creek stood a little taller, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that someone believed in them. And at the heart of it all was Charles, a man who had rediscovered his purpose through the legacy of the woman he had loved and lost. Her letter had set him on a path of redemption, and though the journey was far from over, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Charles's days in Willow Creek began to follow a rhythm, one he found both comforting and invigorating. He'd wake early, often before sunrise, and take a walk through the quiet town. It was during these moments of solitude that he felt closest to Eleanor, as if her presence lingered in the gentle morning breeze or the soft rustling of leaves. Her memory wasn't just in the letter she'd left behind, it was in every corner of the town she had loved. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs. Charles worked tirelessly alongside the residents, helping with projects large and small. He found joy in the simplest tasks, whether it was painting walls at the community center or helping to unload supplies for the food pantry. The manual labor was a far cry from the boardroom meetings and power lunches that had once defined his life, but it gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't realized he was missing. The transformation of Willow Creek wasn't just about the physical improvements, though those were significant. The new playground at the school quickly became a favorite spot for children, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. The community garden, a joint effort by residents and volunteers, began to flourish, providing fresh produce and a sense of pride for those who tended it. The cafe and co-working space Charles had funded became a hub of activity, drawing people together in ways that hadn't seemed possible before. But the most profound changes were the ones happening within Charles himself. He began to see the world through a different lens, one that prioritized connection over competition, compassion over ambition. He no longer measured success by the size of his bank account or the accolades he received. Instead, success was the smile on a child's face as they received a new backpack, or the gratitude in a parent's eyes as they found support in a time of need. Charles's journey wasn't without its struggles. There were moments of doubt, times when he questioned whether he was truly making a difference or simply assuaging his guilt. The skeptics in town, though fewer in number as time went on, still voiced their concerns. Some questioned his motives, while others worried that the changes would bring unintended consequences, such as higher living costs or the erosion of the town's identity. In these moments, Charles leaned on the relationships he was building. Pastor Reynolds became a trusted confidant, offering guidance and encouragement when Charles felt uncertain. The residents who had initially been wary of him began to open up, sharing their stories and dreams. Their faith in him fueled his determination, reminding him that the work he was doing wasn't just about honoring Eleanor's legacy. It was about creating a future where everyone could thrive. One evening, after a particularly long day, Charles found himself sitting in the community garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, the kind of beauty that took his breath away. He held Eleanor's letter in his hands, the paper worn from being read and reread countless times. "I hope I'm making you proud," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I hope I'm doing this right." The next morning, Charles awoke to a new sense of clarity. He realized that while Eleanor's letter had set him on this path, the journey was now his own. He wasn't just fulfilling her wishes. He was finding his purpose, rediscovering the parts of himself he had long ignored. The work he was doing in Willow Creek wasn't just about redemption. It was about transformation, for both the town and himself. As the weeks turned into months, Charles became an integral part of the community. The residents no longer saw him as an outsider or a distant benefactor. He was one of them. He attended town meetings, celebrated milestones with families, and shared meals with those he had once considered strangers. He even joined a local softball team, much to the amusement of the younger players who quickly realized he was better at cheering them on than hitting home runs. Through it all, Charles felt Eleanor's presence guiding him. Her vision for Willow Creek was becoming a reality, but it was more than that. It was a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was hope. Even in the shadow of regret, there was a chance for redemption. The people of Willow Creek weren't the only ones who noticed the change in Charles. His colleagues and friends from his former life began to reach out, curious about the man who had seemingly traded a life of luxury for one of service. Some offered words of support, while others were skeptical, unable to reconcile the driven CEO they had known with the man who now found joy in painting murals and planting flowers. Charles welcomed their curiosity, though he didn't feel the need to explain himself. He knew that his transformation wasn't something that could be easily put into words. It was something that had to be experienced, felt in the quiet moments of connection and the shared victories of a community coming together. As the year drew to a close, Willow Creek stood as a testament to what was possible when people came together with a shared vision and a willingness to work toward a common goal. The town wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome and lessons to learn, but it was thriving in ways that had once seemed impossible. And at the heart of it all was Charles, a man who had found redemption not in grand gestures or self-pity, but in the simple, powerful act of showing up. He had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the relationships we build and the impact we leave behind. In honoring Eleanor's memory, he had found his own, and he knew that the journey was just beginning. Months had passed and Willow Creek was thriving, yet amidst the smiles and successes, Charles couldn't shake a lingering sense of unfinished business. He carried Eleanor's letter everywhere, tucked safely in his jacket pocket. It was his guiding star, a reminder of her hopes and dreams for the town and for him. But there was one line in the letter he had deliberately avoided, one that haunted him more than he cared to admit. Eleanor's words had been clear. "In all my dreams for Willow Creek, the one thing I wish I could have done was bring my family back together. Charles, if there's anything you can do to mend those bonds, do it for me. For us. Family." The word echoed in his mind as he sat in the quiet of his room one evening. He hadn't spoken to his sister Lydia in over a decade. Their last conversation had ended in an argument so heated that neither had reached out since. Charles had buried himself in his career, using it as an excuse to avoid the pain of their estrangement. But now, Eleanor's words forced him to confront the reality he'd ignored for too long. Lydia had always been the grounding force in his life growing up. While Charles had pursued business, she had chosen a quieter path, becoming a teacher in a small town not far from Willow Creek. Their rift had been over money, a loan Charles had given her to help with a medical emergency that she couldn't repay as quickly as he had expected. Harsh words had been exchanged, and pride had kept them both from making amends. Sitting in the dim light of his room, Charles realized that if he was truly going to honor Eleanor's wishes, he couldn't ignore this part of the letter. It wasn't just about building a community or helping strangers. It was about facing his own failures, even when it was uncomfortable. The next morning, Charles made a decision. He called his assistant in the city and asked for Lydia's current address. It wasn't hard to find. She still lived in the same modest house she had moved into years ago. The thought of seeing her again filled him with both anticipation and dread. As Charles approached Lydia's house later that week, his heart pounded. The small, weathered home was surrounded by a tidy garden, its vibrancy a testament to Lydia's love of nature. He hesitated at the gate, questioning whether he had the right to intrude after all these years. Before he could second-guess himself further, the door opened and Lydia stepped out. She froze when she saw him, her expression a mix of shock and suspicion. "Charles," she said, her tone guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," he replied, his voice soft. "To apologize." Lydia crossed her arms, clearly skeptical. "It's been over 10 years. Why now?" He hesitated, then pulled Eleanor's letter from his pocket. "Because of this," he said, handing it to her. "It's from Eleanor. She wrote it before she passed." Lydia's eyes softened at the mention of Eleanor's name. She took the letter, her hands trembling slightly, and began to read. Charles watched as her expression shifted. First confusion, then sadness, and finally, a flicker of understanding. When she finished, Lydia looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "She wanted us to fix this," she said quietly. Charles nodded. "She did, and she was right. I've spent so much time chasing success that I forgot what really matters. I let my pride get in the way of our relationship, and I'm sorry for everything." Lydia's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before she spoke. "I was angry at you, Charles, for the way you handled things, for the way you dismissed my struggles, but I was also too proud to reach out. I'm sorry, too." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken emotions. Slowly, Lydia stepped forward and pulled Charles into a hug. It was tentative at first, but as they held each other, the weight of their estrangement began to lift. Over the next few hours, they sat in Lydia's living room, talking about everything they had missed in each other's lives. Charles told her about Willow Creek, the shelter he had found in Eleanor's dreams, and the person he was trying to become. Lydia shared stories of her students, her struggles, and the small joys that had kept her going. By the time he left, Charles felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Reconnecting with Lydia was a reminder that redemption wasn't just about grand gestures or sweeping changes. It was about mending the relationships that shaped who he was. As he drove back to Willow Creek that evening, the sunset bathed the horizon in hues of gold and crimson. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "Cherish the people who matter most." For the first time, Charles truly understood the depth of her message. It wasn't just about building a better world for others. It was about being present, showing love, and finding the courage to heal what was broken. And in doing so, he had discovered a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. The transformation of Willow Creek was unlike anything the community had ever witnessed. What began as a humble attempt to honor Eleanor's memory had grown into something much larger, a living, breathing embodiment of her dreams. Yet for Charles, it wasn't just about the town. It was about becoming the person Eleanor always believed he could be. Every corner of Willow Creek reflected Eleanor's vision. The new community center, affectionately named Eleanor's Haven, stood at the heart of the town. Its doors were always open, welcoming people of all ages for workshops, support groups, and activities that fostered connection. The garden surrounding it, lovingly maintained by volunteers, was a tribute to Eleanor's love of nature, a serene space where residents could reflect, connect, and heal. Charles spent his mornings at the center, greeting residents and learning about their lives. It was a stark contrast to his former life, where his days were consumed by meetings, deadlines, and power plays. Here, he was just Charles, a man trying to make amends and contribute to something meaningful. One morning, as Charles walked through the center, he spotted a familiar figure. Ruth, an elderly woman who had been living alone in a crumbling house on the edge of town, was sitting in the sunlit atrium, knitting alongside a group of other women. Her face, once marked by worry and isolation, now carried a radiant smile. "Good morning, Ruth," Charles greeted her warmly. She looked up, her eyes twinkling. "Morning, Mr. Carter, or should I say Charlie? Everyone here calls you that." He chuckled. "Charlie works just fine." Ruth gestured to the scarf she was knitting. "This is for the winter drive. I never thought I'd be doing something like this again. You know, after my husband passed, I stopped going out. But this place, well, it gave me a reason to leave the house. Her words hit Charles deeply. Eleanor's dream wasn't just about revitalizing a town, it was about revitalizing lives. Stories like Ruth's reminded him why he was here and why this work mattered. But not everyone in Willow Creek was quick to embrace change. Skeptics still lingered, questioning Charles's motives. They whispered about his past, about the years he had spent in his ivory tower while their community struggled. Charles didn't blame them. Trust wasn't something he could demand. It was something he had to earn. One of the most vocal critics was Tom, the owner of the local hardware store. A gruff man in his late 50s, Tom had been vocal about his distrust of Charles's sudden involvement in the town. "I don't need some big city billionaire telling me how to run my life," Tom had said at a town hall meeting. Where was he when we needed him before? Instead of responding defensively, Charles approached Tom directly. One afternoon, he walked into the hardware store, catching Tom by surprise. "What can I do for you?" Tom asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Charles smiled. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me. I'm trying to build some raised garden beds for the center, but I'm not exactly handy." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You want me to believe you don't have a team of workers to do that for you?" "I could," Charles admitted, "but I'd rather do it myself, and I could really use your expertise." For a moment, Tom studied him as if trying to decipher whether Charles was being genuine. Finally, he sighed and gestured toward a display of tools. "All right, let's see what you're working with." Over the next few hours, Tom guided Charles through the process, offering tips and even sharing a few jokes. By the time they were done, the tension between them had eased. "You know," Tom said as Charles prepared to leave, "you're not what I expected." Charles smiled. "Neither are you." It was a small victory, but one that meant the world to Charles. Slowly, the walls of distrust in Willow Creek began to crumble, replaced by a sense of community and shared purpose. Back at the center, Charles threw himself into the daily work. He joined residents in painting murals, planting trees, and organizing events. He wasn't just the man funding the changes. He was part of the process, working alongside them to bring Eleanor's vision to life. But as much as he gave to the town, it gave back to him tenfold. Charles found himself forming genuine connections, friendships that weren't based on power or wealth but on mutual respect and shared goals. These relationships became a lifeline, grounding him in a way he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's passing. One evening, as the town gathered for a community dinner at the center, Charles stood up to address the crowd. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "When I first came here, I thought I was saving this town," he began. "But the truth is, Willow Creek saved me. You've taught me what it means to truly live, to care, and to be part of something bigger than myself." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I owe all of this to Eleanor. She believed in this town, in its people, and in me. Even when I didn't deserve it, I can only hope to honor her by continuing the work she started." The applause that followed was thunderous, but what moved Charles most were the smiles and nods of approval from the residents. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of belonging, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been searching for all his life. That night, as Charles walked home under the stars, he thought about Eleanor. He imagined her smiling down on him, her spirit alive in every corner of Willow Creek. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them. Charles was no longer the man he had been a year ago. The letter Eleanor had left him had been more than a revelation. It had been a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. Months had passed since Charles first read Eleanor's letter, and yet its words lingered in his mind. It had been a guide, a catalyst for his transformation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. Eleanor had always been thoughtful, often leaving layers of meaning in her actions and words. What if there was something deeper he had missed? One quiet evening, as he sifted through old photo albums in their home, Charles stumbled upon a small wooden box tucked away at the back of a shelf. The box was familiar. It had belonged to Eleanor, though he'd never given it much thought before. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a collection of keepsakes, ticket stubs from their first date, a dried flower from their wedding day, and a series of handwritten notes. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper, its edges worn from time. Charles unfolded it carefully, his heart racing as he recognized Eleanor's handwriting. The letter began simply, My dearest Charles, if you're reading this, it means you found the box. The box where I've kept some of our most cherished memories. But there's one more thing I need to share with you. Something I didn't include in my first letter because I wanted you to discover it for yourself. Charles's breath caught. Another letter. What could it possibly say? The note continued. I've always believed in you, Charles. Even during our hardest times, I knew there was a goodness in you that just needed a chance to shine. But there's something I want you to understand. The legacy you leave behind isn't just about the businesses you build or the money you accumulate. It's about the lives you touch and the love you give. He paused, the weight of her words sinking in. Eleanor had always seen the world in a way he struggled to comprehend, valuing connection and compassion over ambition and success. She had tried to teach him, but he had been too consumed by his career to listen. The letter continued. There's one more dream I didn't share with you before. I wanted to create a foundation, not just for Willow Creek, but for other communities that need help, that need someone to believe in them. I wanted it to be a place where people could come together, share their talents, and build something beautiful. I hope you'll consider making this dream a reality, not for me, but for yourself, and for the people whose lives you can change. A lump formed in Charles's throat as he read the final lines. You've always had the power to create something extraordinary, Charles. Not with money, but with your heart. Please, don't wait until it's too late to use it. With all my love, Eleanor. Charles set the letter down, his vision blurred by tears. Eleanor had left him not just with memories, but with a mission, a chance to truly honor her legacy in a way that extended beyond Willow Creek. It was a daunting idea, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Charles called an emergency meeting with his team. They gathered in his office, curious but cautious about the sudden summons. When Charles entered the room, his demeanor was different. Calm, determined, and unshakable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, his voice steady. And I've realized that what we're doing in Willow Creek shouldn't stop there. There are other towns, other communities, that need the same opportunities and support. His team exchanged glances, unsure of where he was headed. I'm starting a foundation, Charles announced. It will focus on revitalizing underserved communities, providing resources, education, and opportunities for people to rebuild their lives. This isn't just a project, it's a commitment. One of his senior advisors raised a hand hesitantly. Mr. Carter, this is a massive undertaking, are you sure? Yes, Charles interrupted firmly. I'm sure. This isn't about business, it's about doing what's right. If anyone doesn't want to be part of this, I understand. But for those who do, I promise it will be worth it. To his surprise, the room erupted in applause. His team, many of whom had been inspired by his transformation in Willow Creek, were eager to support this new endeavor. They began brainstorming ideas, creating a roadmap for the Foundation's first initiatives. As the meeting adjourned, Charles felt a renewed sense of energy. He knew this journey wouldn't be easy, but it was one he was ready to take. For Eleanor, for the people he could help, and for the man he was striving to become. That evening, as he stood on the balcony of his home, gazing out at the city skyline, Charles felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Eleanor's voice echoed in his mind, her belief in him a guiding light through his darkest moments. He whispered into the night, I won't let you down, Eleanor. I promise. In that moment, Charles wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was a man determined to change the world, not through wealth, but through love, compassion, and a legacy that would make Eleanor proud. Months turned into years, and Charles's vision for the Foundation began to take shape. What had started as an ambitious idea fueled by Eleanor's letter became a nationwide movement, impacting countless lives and communities. The Foundation, aptly named the Eleanor Initiative, became a beacon of hope for those in need, embodying the values of love, compassion, and second chances that Eleanor had championed. Charles poured his heart and soul into the work. Every project, every town revitalized, and every life touched reminded him of Eleanor's words. It wasn't just about the large-scale initiatives. It was about the small, personal connections he made along the way. He visited communities, spoke with families, and listened to their stories. Each interaction brought him closer to understanding the depth of Eleanor's dream. One afternoon, during a visit to a new community center funded by the Foundation, Charles met a young woman named Mia. She was a single mother who had struggled to make ends meet after losing her job. Through the Eleanor Initiative, she had received job training and childcare support, allowing her to rebuild her life. Mia approached Charles with a shy smile. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to thank you. This foundation gave me a second chance when I thought there wasn't one left for me." Charles shook her hand warmly, his voice genuine. "You don't need to thank me, Mia. You've done the hard work. We just gave you the tools." Her eyes glistened with tears. "You've done more than that. You've given my son a future." Moments like these were what drove Charles forward. Each story was a testament to Eleanor's vision, a reminder that one person's compassion could spark a ripple effect of change. Back in Willow Creek, the town had flourished under Charles's continued support. The small library Eleanor had cherished was now a state-of-the-art learning center, complete with computers, a mentorship program, and an art gallery featuring local talent. The town square, once a neglected space, had become a vibrant hub for markets, festivals, and community gatherings. Charles often found himself returning to the gazebo in the park, where he and Eleanor had spent so many quiet moments. It was here that he felt closest to her, as though her spirit lingered in the rustling leaves and the gentle breeze. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, Charles sat on the bench near the gazebo. In his hands he held a plaque he had commissioned for the site. It read, "In loving memory of Eleanor Carter, whose love and vision touched countless lives." He placed the plaque on a small pedestal near the gazebo, stepping back to admire it. For a moment he closed his eyes, imagining Eleanor's warm smile and the sound of her laughter. The ache of her absence was still there, but it was now accompanied by a profound sense of gratitude for the love they had shared, the lessons she had taught him, and the legacy she had inspired. As he stood there, lost in thought, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Sarah, his daughter, now a young woman with a fierce passion for social work. She had joined the Eleanor Initiative, dedicating her life to continuing her mother's mission. "Dad," Sarah said, walking up to him with a smile. "It's beautiful." Charles turned to her, his eyes softening. She deserved nothing less. They stood side by side, the weight of Eleanor's absence lightened by the love and purpose she had left behind. Sarah looped her arm through her father's, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You've done incredible things, Dad," she said. "Mom would be so proud." Charles's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. "We've done it together. She's the reason for all of this." As night fell, the park lights illuminated the plaque, casting a warm glow that seemed to radiate Eleanor's presence. Charles and Sarah sat on the bench, watching as families strolled through the park. Children laughed in the distance and life carried on in the vibrant town Eleanor had loved so much. Charles took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over him. He knew that his journey of redemption was far from over, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. Eleanor's love, her vision, and her unwavering belief in him would guide him every step of the way. In the quiet of the evening, as the world around them continued to thrive, Charles whispered a final promise to the woman who had changed his life forever. "I'll keep going, Eleanor. For you, for us, for the future you believed in." The legacy they had built together was one of love, hope, and second chances, a reminder that even in the face of loss, the courage to change and the power of compassion could create something truly extraordinary. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Your support means the world. Support means the world. Support means the world.